Harry has arrived back to the UK to booze and cheers as he attended the 10th anniversary service at St. Paul's Cathedral for the Invictus Games. Having started 10 years ago this year, the Invictus Games really has become the face in many ways of soldiers and veterans as they recover from combat. But there are also some really, really glaring problems because while it is a fantastic event, it has one glaring, massive, massive problem that's not going to go away. And in fact, I would argue continues to get worse. And that is Prince Harry and by extension, Meghan Markle, because really the games have become the Harry and Meghan show. They use it to promote themselves. All of the media coverage goes to Harry and Meghan when they're at the games. I mean, think about it right now. Can you think of any name of any competitor from the Invictus Games? And answer is you probably can't. And that's because all of the media coverage, of course, goes to Harry and Meghan. And because of that, I think the Invictus Games, as it comes upon its 10th anniversary, really needs to rethink Harry as its patron and what it means for the future. Now, I'm not saying they have to get rid of him right away, but what I'm saying is if the games want to continue and if they want to succeed, it needs to stop becoming the cult of Harry and become really about the veterans yet again, because yes, you do need a patron, you do need a public face that supports and endorses the games to the general audience. But at the same time, if your founder becomes somebody who is incredibly toxic, whose public image continues to take a nosedive, is that person really at the end of the day going to be helpful or hurtful? Because the Invictus Games wants to succeed. The competitors love it. But the truth is, can it survive the next 5 years? I think that's a huge question, especially considering what might happen with Harry and Meghan. So we are going to discuss this today because I think the veterans deserve these games. But the question is the current iteration working? And in my video today, I'm going to try to argue that it isn't. But if you guys haven't been to Royal News Network before, my name is Brittany. I provide you all compelling royal commentary about the latest news, sometimes the drama going on behind the scenes. So if you guys want to smash that subscribe button, that would be absolutely fantastic. I would love to have you back as we talk about all things related to royals. And I also wanted to let you guys know if you're still interested, especially in the lead up to Mother's Day, we are still doing our fundraiser. So if you purchase this lucky Royal Star ring, 5% of the proceeds from myself go to the American Cancer Society and Ana Lucia Diamonds as well. So I will go ahead and put a link up above for you and one in the description box. And if you use the code REAL20, you will save 20%. And just as a reminder as well, if you are interested in traveling to Europe for Christmas time, we are going to have a Christmas tour. So if you're interested in going to Europe with me, we will talk about all things royal, Harry and Meghan, the German royals. There are even, I believe, some royals in the Czech Republic as well, or at least part of the households that it was attached to at one point, and see some amazing sites in Berlin, Dresden, and Prague. And in addition, going to the Christmas market. So if you want a really, really amazing atmospheric Christmas experience, feel free to check out the link up above as well and in the description box, because I would love to have you join me. I'm so excited for that trip. It's going to be so amazing. I know it's a bit far out, 7 months now, but it's going to be on us before we know it. And it is right before Christmas, but you will be home in time for Christmas, because I know that's really important to me, and I'm sure a lot of other people as well. All right, guys. So this story, again, is one I've been trying to think through how to address, because I like the Invictus Games. I think the Invictus Games are a good thing. But I also think the Invictus Games is sort of become overinflated based on what the audience is telling us. And what that means is that your audience, the people who are generating and coming in to watch it, tell you how big a thing it is. And it just seems like it's either a combination of Harry and Meghan and or just sort of a poor attempt on the Invictus Games itself to promote it to a broad audience. So let's take a look at their YouTube thing, because I think this is important. So here we have the Invictus Games YouTube channel. And just to point out, I have no backing, nothing. I grew this channel from nothing, basically, and I have almost 150,000 subscribers. The Invictus Games Foundation has Prince Harry as a patron and can only muster up 3,800 subscribers. So I just wanted to point that out. Number one, they have 149 videos, and there's just a lot of issues you can see with it, which is that nobody is really watching this content. 6 days ago, they had something that got 809 views, 541. And let's see, oldest is from 10 years ago, and this is as it was beginning. You got 28,000, 75,000. I would say some of these are the most popular videos are from years and years ago. Most recently, most of their stuff just isn't getting traction anymore. Now they have diversified a bit because they've started to have each individual Invictus games have its own YouTube channel, which sort of makes sense and sort of doesn't. But I got to say, this was the most recent video here in the top, and it's from 8 months ago, and it's got 14,000. But every one of these is from years and years ago. But again, they've changed things. So let's look at Dusseldorf. So this one does have more, but on this one we have 7,260. And so we have videos that have done pretty well, but not quite as well. And it stopped posting 7 months ago. And so most popular didn't even hit 100,000. And that includes Prince Harry's speech. So his speech to, let's see if this was a closing or opening. I think this was maybe the opening. And you have over here this just Home for Invictus, the preview for it or the trailer that got a lot more views than Harry's speech. And Team Germany meets Harry. We've got Meghan over here. And so you have an issue here where I think the dividends for the Invictus games sort of diminishes as time goes on. And look, this was even before the games launched and it got more attention. So you got something where the Invictus games, yes, it is successful, but how successful is a bit of a question mark. And I want, again, these games to succeed for the veterans because I think they enjoy them. But again, their huge problem is their patron, and that is Prince Harry. Because as he arrived to St. Paul's, there were definitely some cheers and some boos. And so I'm going to show you guys a couple of different videos because depending on where you're at within that square, you hear different things. Sometimes the booing sounds like cheering, cheering sounds like booing. So let's go ahead and take a listen to a couple of different angles. One is a very clear boo because the person's right near where they're filming, but other ones it's hard to tell. So go ahead and take a listen. Other circumstances, Harry in this instance might have received an incredibly warm welcome. But this move towards America and this attempt by Harry and Meghan to essentially monetize every aspect of their lives, I think is incredibly rubbing people the wrong way. And as the Invictus Games goes forward, it has glaring issues with Harry. Number one, it's become the Harry and Meghan show, mainly sometimes the Meghan show. Meghan offers nothing to the games. She is there to essentially wear pretty outfits and smile and cheer. That is essentially her sole purpose in going to the games. And while yes, Catherine goes and supports William when he does the Earthshot Prize, I think with Harry and Meghan, because of everything they've churned out about themselves, the media hyper focuses on them. And that's for a couple of reasons. Because I know some people complain, especially on the Sussex side, that, oh, they cover them so much sometimes, like they always regurgitate articles. And I would agree with that. If you read through the Express, it's very clear they're regurgitating stories over and over and over again. And I would say that's true for some aspects of the media. But the thing is, Harry and Meghan fed it to begin with. When it comes to the media beast, if you give them constant little stories, the media starts to rely on that. And the less popular Harry and Meghan become, the more invested you could say the media is in churning out negative stories about the couple because they're so unpopular. Negativity tends to sell. And so Harry and Meghan started that train, and I think particularly Meghan did, because if you remember when they first started dating, she was dripping to the media constantly through her Instagram, through various paparazzi strolls and those sorts of things. She clearly wanted the attention, but sometimes once you open up that can of worms, you can't shove it back in. And so as time goes on, the media hyper focuses more and more on them. And I personally think if Meghan actually cared about the games, number one, she probably wouldn't attend because the games then focuses on her and Harry. Now, I've argued again that's somewhat by design by the Invictus Games itself to somewhat camouflage the lack of attendance. That's just my theory. I don't know that for sure, but that is sort of the theory I'm starting to lean towards. Or Meghan would stop wearing a bunch of designer gear in various flavors and actually just wear strictly Invictus gear. I think she could blend in much more and the media would focus on her fashion much less if she cared enough about the games to not wear a new designer outfit every single time she strolled out, but instead to simply wear always Invictus merch. That would stop almost all fashion conversation. In fact, it might help the Invictus Games by selling merchandise because merchandise is one of the easiest hanging fruits when it comes to promotion. I have my own Royal News Network branded gear, and I have that in part so I can use it when I'm taking trips, but also because it's an opportunity for a bit of self promotion. People see the logo, they might look it up, they might see the channel, they might really enjoy it. So that is what I do in order to just sort of keep some attention in play. And I think we saw obviously the extent of that continuing to grow. It wasn't quite as evident in Australia and New Zealand, which was the first Invictus Games after they were married. We saw it a bit in Toronto when she showed up. Of course, all the media attention went to her. Then Australia and New Zealand, the Invictus Games was still operating largely without too much influence by Harry and Meghan in some ways, because yes, they did attend parts of it, but they weren't there for a lot of it because they put the tour in the middle. And so they kind of floated in and out. And according to reports, and I don't know if this is necessarily true, Harry just didn't even have a lot to do with the whole setup of the games. And so then, though, as it moved, and obviously as the Hague Games got pushed back, Meghan and Harry became more and more part of it. And we saw Meghan drop any Invictus Games merch completely. So she did wear some in Australia and New Zealand. She dropped it completely, though, once they got to the Hague. And it seemed to be more of a Harry and Meghan show because obviously Meghan had to kiss Harry when he came up after she introduced him to the crowd for the opening ceremony. And it got really bad in Dusseldorf because she was there almost the whole time. And then it was pretty bad in Vancouver as well. And I feel like the Vancouver games are only going to get worse. This problem is just only going to get worse and worse over time because the Invictus Games, and I think this is the fault of the games themselves, has not done enough to separate themselves from Harry. And what I mean by that is that Harry still, of course, can be the patron of it. He, of course, can be, you could say, the spokesperson of it, the major face of it. But the other major problem I'm seeing with the Invictus Games right now is I would argue it's almost sort of the cult of Harry. And what I mean by that is that it's so Harry centric. The bad thing about brands sometimes, if it becomes too focused on one single identity in terms of a person, is that when that person leaves, the organization sort of completely collapses pretty quickly after that or diminishes catastrophically post the exit of their major player. And that is because it became too much around that person rather than seeing the broader vision. Now, when I look at my own channel, yes, I'm the face of it because I'm the only one working behind the scenes, but if this channel were ever to grow, I would be really, really excited to have some different voices in the space and really be able to diversify because I don't want it to be about a cult of me. I want it to be generally about royals, about royal fashion, jewelry, television shows and movies, news, commentary, events, engagements, weddings, anniversaries, all these sorts of things. I want it to be about all those things, the content rather than me individually as a person. But because obviously I'm the only voice right now and the only one driving it. But that is my grander vision for the channel. At this point, I feel like as time goes on, the Invictus Games is attaching itself more and more to Harry, not putting that divide that needs to be there. Because in order for the Invictus Games to be successful over time, I think it must be separate from Harry. And he can still be part of it, but they need to establish their own identity without him. Because if Harry truly cares about the games, he wants it to succeed whether he's there or not. It doesn't matter to him whether he's there. It's all about the games and themselves being successful. Because I feel like even when we see things about the games, Harry's face pops up constantly. Now I was looking through the Invictus Games Foundation Twitter, and he showed up pretty frequently. And some of it was from individual people posting. So I can't really fault them there. Really, that's not really what I'm trying to do. But what I see is that if it becomes so much about him, it loses focus overall. And when it loses focus overall, if Harry leaves, the whole thing might be gone in an instant because all of a sudden, all the support and everything that people focused on it for completely evaporated. Because why are corporate sponsors and cities still supporting the Invictus Games? It's a complex series of reasons. Because number one, the Invictus Games, I don't think is actually making anybody any money. So I think personally, this is my personal opinion, sort of a money suck. So they establish these games, and then the Olympics is kind of like this too. The city can set on the Olympics, and they're left at the end of the day with a massive amount of debt because they took on too much debt to build all the facilities and everything, and then they can't sustain it. I don't think the Invictus Games is quite that way, but I don't think they're bringing in enough people to really justify the cost, you could say. And so because of that, there's just not enough money to be made in a lot of ways. And so they have to rely on the cities and the corporate sponsors because in Vancouver, the Canadian citizens are on the hook for 15 million. And if you're in the province where Vancouver is located, British Columbia, sorry, I forgot it for a second, you are also on the hook for an additional $15 million to put on the games. So the Canadian government is essentially funding the entirety of the Invictus Games. And yes, the foundation itself is helping in some aspects, but they really rely on the countries and the cities to put these games on. And then you add on the additional corporate sponsors. They're sponsoring the games. Now, they're doing it for two reasons. One is because Harry has made it a household name, and you can't fault the Invictus Games for relying on that in a lot of ways. But the other reason is that for companies and cities and governments and stuff like that, it looks good for them to support their troops. So they want to do it. But the problem is will these games succeed now with or without Harry? I don't know. And again, if Harry really cared about the games, he would care whether or not it succeeds with or without him. I think his identity has now become so attached to these games, especially as he's lost connection with his family and friends in the UK, that these games must succeed, that he's clinging to them more because it's like the sole thing he still has from his time as a royal because he's been forced to give up everything else. He's been forced to give up every aspect of his life pretty much. He doesn't hunt anymore like he used to because Meghan doesn't like it. He does yoga now, which he probably didn't do. He, I think, is being healthier in some ways, doing the vegan stuff. He seems a lot more new agey than he used to be. I heard that Harry used to attend church a lot more. Now I question a lot of his leanings because oftentimes what he talks about seems just very, very new agey. And to me, I think his grandmother, who was such a strong Christian, I'm sure she's rolling over in her grave based on some of the comments that he's made now post getting together with Meghan. And because of all those things, he must cling to these games more. And he also thinks it's sort of a shield. Even the Sussex stands, who sometimes can be some of the worst people on Twitter, they're like, oh, we're raising money for the Invictus Games. I mean, which is great. Bravo for you. You're raising money for charity. But that doesn't excuse your behavior. Just because you can be charitable in certain instances does not mean you are allowed to be awful in others. You have to do both. You can't say, well, I give to charity. I'm part of this charity and yet be an awful human being. No. I like the example some people have used, I've heard before, is that just because somebody is in a wheelchair doesn't mean they're a nice person. And that might seem harsh, but it's true because people are people. And just because Harry is doing this charity, it does not shield him from all of his negative behavior. And number 3 problem that I see for the Invictus Games going forward, speaking of that, is that Harry has become an incredibly toxic brand, especially with Meghan Markle, because we did have this interesting popularity poll, and I did do a whole video on this, and unfortunately the audio was all gone. And so hopefully this doesn't happen this time now that I'm thinking about it. But I lost all the audio. But it was interesting because they had this new popularity poll that came out, and it showed that the royals remain as popular as ever. And Harry, in particular, got a couple of boost of points. Even Prince Andrew got one boost in terms of a percentage point. But Meghan stayed stagnant at 25%. And so she remains wildly unpopular, which is why she didn't go to this, is because she would increase the likelihood that they would get booed. 100% she would increase the likelihood. And because of that, she doesn't want to go to some things because of that possibility. But because their brand has become so toxic, because you can see in the popularity polls, Harry taking an absolute nosedive since getting into a relationship with Meghan Markle. Like, he used to be the most popular royal based on the YouGov poll until it went after 2018. And because of that, he can pull the Invictus Games down with him because it becomes now a more questionable enterprise than it was initially. Because people wonder, are they paying for private jets for Harry and Meghan? Are they paying for Harry and Meghan's demands for like the most expensive suite in the area? Are they paying for her wardrobe? Are they paying for his wardrobe? So many different questions that I don't feel like the Invictus Games really is answering well. And there actually was an instance where they were asked something about what happened to the money from the Heart of Invictus. And they said, oh, Harry did donate it. But they were also asking for donations, which they said they wouldn't before. And so you just got this interesting situation where the head of the brand is rather toxic, and he does bring the brand down with him. And because he won't let it go or figure out a way to be part of it and yet also not solely have it focused around him, it's becoming more and more difficult to justify the Invictus Games in some ways. Because the other problem I'm seeing, and I hate to say this because I think it's true, but at the same time, I'm sure it's disappointing for some, is that it ain't attracting an audience. And the Invictus Games, in order to justify itself going forwards, needs to attract an audience. And I don't know how necessarily they do that, but Harry ain't helping them at all. Because the Heart of Invictus, it should have been a great promotional tool for them. It should have been. It really, really should have been. But the thing is that it became so Harry centric. And I think in some ways, because it was somewhat focused on Harry and they couldn't figure out what the main storyline was because he's not a good producer. Then you have the situation where it was a very meandering documentary. There wasn't a strong storyline, a thread that brought everything through. We focused on stories and on people that weren't exactly connected with combat injuries. Because my thing is that there was one guy who did not have a combat injury. He was injured in an accident here stateside, and another gentleman who seemed to have a lot of issues before entering the military. And so the things he was dealing with were influenced by his time in the service, but also an outcome of childhood and other various issues that he already had. It's like, I felt like it lost focus because what you need to be focusing on is those who have been injured in combat or in active service. And they missed out on the greatest storyline, I think, of the whole thing, which was the gentleman from South Korea, who I really wish they would have focused on more, because in his society, it's considered shameful to have a disability like his, which is he's missing part of his hands because an ordnance exploded near him. And so because of that, he wonders how people are going to treat his daughter, her classmates, and those sorts of things because of this disability. So he wants to prove to her that he can live with this and that he is perfectly normal and that every individual person has value. And that should have been the message of the documentary. In addition to the actual parts on Ukraine were very good as well. But because I think Harry just doesn't even understand to a certain extent what the Invictus Games are, aside from a reflection of him, I think he missed the better stories. I think he focused on things that he really shouldn't have in exchange for stories that were just, I don't think personally as compelling. I found the South Korean guy much more compelling than the American guy. I just did, or the Canadian guy. I found him much more interesting, the one from Ukraine. I found all of that much more interesting than some of the aspects they chose to focus on more. And yes, that's sometimes the outcome of a documentary, but I also think it was a reflection of a lack of focus. And they just weren't able to bring things, I think, to fruition in a way. And because of that, a tool that should have been fantastic for making people more invested in the games failed. It absolutely failed. It flopped. We don't have the exact numbers yet. I should actually look because they should be out pretty soon because the numbers for, I think, the first half of 2023 came out around January. So they should come out in June or maybe July. Maybe they've come out. But we can look and see how many people actually did watch Heart of Invictus. And I just don't think it was that many. It never hit the top 10. And there should have been a way to make that more interesting. But Harry and Meghan are so self centric that they can't really see over their own noses. And though Harry wasn't in as much of it as I thought he would be, he definitely started it out. And he just wasn't that compelling. I mean, his intro, and I've shared this before, is like, I'm Harry, I'm a husband, I got kids, I got a dog. Like, I started Invictus. And so that was his beginning. And he was talking to his friends about how he came up with these ideas. And obviously some of that is questionable. Not saying it's not. But all of that to me was just utterly uninteresting. What was interesting was the soldiers. And I think that's the problem. The final greatest issue with the Invictus Games is that Harry and Meghan have put a cloud over all the other stories connected with the games to the such an extent that I don't think it's possible for even a decent PR team to push out the stories of the individual soldiers out from the blanket of Harry and Meghan. And because of that, so much of what makes the Invictus Games, I think, watchable and compelling is completely and utterly lost. Because I was at the Invictus Games in 2016 and I did enjoy sitting volleyball, but honestly, I did not enjoy swimming. And some of it was that it was just really hard to watch people who really, really struggled to do, a swimming stroke. And honestly, it left me bored a lot of times because it would take them twice as long as it would everybody else to finish the strokes that they needed to. And I think I would have been so much more invested if I knew the story behind it because there was a story there. I just didn't know it. And so as an average spectator, I just got a little bored and distracted. And so because of that, I missed out. There was probably an amazing story there. I just didn't know it. And that's the problem that's infecting everything now is you don't know the stories. You don't know the stories. The stories get totally lost. And I thought a great counterexample is a recent video we got from Kensington Palace. And Prince William was giving out some of the British honors that they do. And what I thought was interesting is that they started with William. He didn't say anything, but he started the video because as the audience, it brings us in because, oh, yes, we recognize that face. And then it goes and all we hear from are the recipients of the award. So go ahead and take a listen to part of this.
There's people from so many different industries, so many different walks of life, and I feel really honoured to be in the company of those other people that are here today.
You don't dream of this stuff growing up, so obviously you're just really focused on what you're trying to achieve on the pitch. So yeah, very, very privileged, very honoured, but yeah, just really surreal really, and trying to take it in.
So I think this video is so good because what it does is it highlights that this is something William is doing, but puts a focus on others. And that's what I think the Invictus Games has completely and utterly lost. Because much like the Earthshaw Prize too, I think the Earthshaw Prize will continue after William because yes, William is the face of it, but he's also not so focused and obsessed with it that's become an aspect of his identity. It's something he does and it's something he leads, but it's not an aspect of his identity as it is with Harry. And so I think Earthshot Prize has a much better chance of going on beyond William but he's not so consumed with it that he can't see beyond himself. William has, I think, a broader vision. And I think Harry's vision for the Invictus Games that he has at one point has been sort of lost as his public reputation, as his family relationships, as his friend relationships, as everything around his life has sort of collapsed. He just looks at the Invictus Games more as sort of this reflection of himself and sort of as a way to boost his self-esteem. But a charity isn't there to boost your self-esteem, Harry. The focus should be back on the soldiers. How can you highlight them? And I think making sure that Meghan Markle doesn't attend is a key way because one of the big things that happens when Meghan is there is that Harry's totally distracted by her. He has to hold her hand. She has to sit right next to him. They interact so much, and it becomes a bubble of them rather than the broader Invictus Games. And because of that, I think the Invictus Games is in a lot of trouble. 10 years in, the people who love it still love it. But the aspect of Harry as part of it, I think, continues to damage it. Because the other thing, and I forgot to mention, and although this is just speculation, is that I think in the case of Harry and Meghan divorce, I think that surge of support Harry perhaps saw around Mexit might totally dissipate because the support that came from really Meghan fans, not Harry fans, will just evaporate overnight because they were always more invested in it as a reflection of Harry and Meghan's relationship, not the games itself. And the Invictus Games PR team needs to start focusing on how to promote the games. Forget about Harry. How do you promote these soldiers? How do you get them out in front of people more? Because I don't think they're doing that. And if they are, it's not busting through. So, how do you get around the cloud that is Harry and Meghan? That is their challenge. And if they can't do it, if Harry's public image takes more of a nosedive, I think the whole Invictus Games itself might eventually end up collapsing. So guys, let me know what you think of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and feel free to subscribe if you haven't already, and I shall see you soon. Bye.